Hi, it's Thursday afternoon and it's time for Nature Works Facebook Live. This is Nancy. I'm just back from a 6-day vacation in the Adirondacks. We're doing Facebook a little differently today because we've had so many problems with the sound. We're recording it first and then we're going to put it up on Facebook. So if you have questions, type them in and we'll be monitoring it. But we've been running into glitches with the Facebook Live videos. So this talk today was inspired by my botanizing and horticulturalizing in the Adirondacks. I go camping every year with my friends and we take hikes and we're at a beautiful lodge and there's a lake and there's all these wonderful woodland habitats. And I thought I would just tell you what I saw. As I was driving up to the Adirondacks across the Mass Pike and then up Route 87, the entire side of the road was absolutely covered with goldenrods of all kinds and what are called New England asters. Now, New England asters here at Nature Works are pinched, but along the side of the road they're not. And they come in all colors. Mostly what I saw were purples and blues, a few pinks, but mostly purples and blues in massive waves all up and down the highways. I shared the driving with my sister. And when she drove, I just stared out the window at the plants. There was one point where there was some construction. We had to stop. It gave me time to really look closely at everything. I was trying to identify the different asters and the different goldenrods. And I also noticed tons and tons and tons of the little white woodland asters, either the Ericoides or the Divericatus, everywhere. And because they mow along the side of the road, some of them were shorter than they would normally be in your garden. But there were asters everywhere, and there were monarchs migrating everywhere. The other thing I was happy to see as I was driving was that they didn't mow down the milkweed. Everywhere I looked on the side of the road, I saw more milkweed than I've ever seen in my entire life. And as we watched on the highway, you could see monarchs flitting down the road. So there was so much milkweed that it gives me hope that New York State's on track for this. We got to the camp and there were monarch butterflies at the camp. And there always are. They're moving down probably from Canada through New England and New York down on their migration path. So there wasn't a day that went by where we didn't see monarchs. One of the things that I noticed in the side of the road on the way into the camp along the driveway and pretty much everywhere else was that this plant here, which is Aster, it's umbellatus. You see it has an umbel flower. Aster umbellatus, which is in our gardens, was everywhere. And what's nice about this plant is it was able to weave into the other plant that was everywhere, which was Joe Pye weed and milkweed and goldenrod. So that was the palette I saw. And these are wild sides of the driveway, sides of the road. So when you study what works with what can compete with what in the natural habitat, it's really interesting because it gives you ideas for some of the wilder areas in your yard. And my staff thought I was a little crazy because I bought all these small size flat top Aster umbellatus, because I thought a lot of us could start plugging these into our landscapes, because if one plant does this and it attracts pollinators for 2.5 months, then why not weave it into your landscapes and just have places where you have these pollinator paradises everywhere. So once we were at camp, we walked around and just looked at everything. It was so pretty. There were asters like this particular aster that we have in pots. This is the blue wood aster, Aster cordifolius Avondale. This was everywhere. And there wasn't a single plant of this that didn't have pollinators on it or monarchs on it, or other butterflies. I also saw other butterflies, mostly painted ladies, but there was a lot of monarchs. I also saw the straight wood aster, the common wood aster, which grows everywhere. Now we can sell this. You can also collect seed if you have a wild area. And I saw Aster ericoides Now this is Aster ericoides snow flurry, which is just coming into flower, which is this super cool ground cover. The leaves are it's called ericoides because the leaves look like erica, which is basically a heather. But this one is a ground cover. What I saw throughout the Adirondacks was the taller version of this, but they're very, very distinctive leaves and very, very distinctive flowers, constantly covered with pollinators. I also saw variations on this aster. Now this is Aster latifolius, lady in black. And if you look closely, you can see this has a pretty distinctive look too. The white flower with the purple center, the lilac center. Lady in black is a selection with burgundy leaves. What I saw in the Adirondacks was this with more green leaves. Now I have this plant at home, and as an experiment, I pinched the front half of it, and I didn't pinch the back half. And the back half is about this high, and the front half looks just like this. So I'm going to take photos of it and put it in the email next week so you can see the benefit of pinching. Another goldenrod that I saw in all of the side of the road gardens leading to camp was this particular goldenrod. This is grass leaf goldenrod, which is Solidago graminifolia. This doesn't look as much like a goldenrod as some of the others because a lot of the other goldenrods have an arching flower. But this was definitely woven into all of those spots with the flat top aster and with the Joe Pye weed. So it was really interesting to see all the different plants that grew right around camp. And as we walked around, we got to see that. Now, I did take a couple of forays outside of camp, and one of them was this wonderful 2 to 3 mile hike on a road that led to a retreat center. And the woman I was walking with, I walked with 3 of my friends, she said, you know, I have a little bit of a hip problem. She said, not to worry, this is flat, but it goes through some beautiful territory. So what happens when you walk with me is I keep stopping and running into the woods and running back. Or one of my friends would say, what's this, Nan? And I'd have to stop and identify stuff. So here are the things that we found. We went through some marshes. And in the marshes, we saw massive, massive winterberries, native winterberries. And they still had more leaves on them than these shrubs. But everybody was asking me, what is that? I said, that's a deciduous holly. It's Ilex verticillata. These were sitting in water in a swamp. And the swamp, what really drew me to it to begin with was that I looked out and all I saw, there were no leaves. I just saw brown buttonbush pods. The whole swamp was filled with buttonbush. And nobody understood what I was saying. I just kept taking pictures going, it's a buttonbush swamp, it's a buttonbush swamp. And finally they said, what are you talking about? And I said, look really closely, and they couldn't believe it. So there was winterberry shrubs, buttonbush shrubs, and pussy willow shrubs in this wet swamp. And it was fascinating to see. There was also all kinds of twiggy dogwoods that were getting their berries. Some of the berries were white and some of them were blue. And the birds would feast on those berries throughout the late fall. So we walked down the road and we saw the swamp filled with the buttonbush, the winterberry. There were swamp oaks, so many oaks, oaks like you wouldn't believe. And it was just absolutely stunning. Then we looked to the side of the road and up the hill, and I can't believe we have this. There were rocks absolutely covered with this polypodium fern. This is a fern that grows on organic leaves and debris and moss that lands and starts to form organic matter on the surfaces of rocks in the woods. And they're just covering the rocks as far as the eye can see. And my friend Marcy and I were just astounded. We kept stopping and staring at these cliffs with these ferns all over it. And the mosses were pretty incredible too. But we saw every kind of fern imaginable. The rocky hillsides along this walk were filled with our native Christmas fern. And Christmas fern is just bulletproof in the landscape. But if you know where they grow natively, they basically grow in shady, woodland, rocky hillsides. Oh, here's a monarch. So The other thing that happened while I was there is that one of the things we do as girls when we camp, and we have a lodge where we eat and we do jigsaw puzzles and we sew and all that jazz. I bring a huge bucket of flowers from my garden up to this lodge, and I make bouquets for the bathroom and for the kitchen and a big bucket on the porch, just to make us happy, because it's a rare treat to get together with all of your friends. So right outside the porch on a railing, I put a bouquet that looked kind of like this. And what surprised me, first of all, this is Cufia, cigar plant. This was picked on Thursday morning, and it was still perfect on Tuesday evening. I never would have thought of using this as a cut flower, but it's a great cut flower. I also had lots and lots of Tithonia, Mexican sunflowers, which in my garden is the #1 flower for monarch butterflies. Well, right now I have clusters of monarch butterflies coming to my yard every night. And last night when I got home, I just sat outside with my husband, had a glass of wine, and they went from the Tithonia, which is an annual Mexican sunflower, over my head, to the Vernonia, the ironweed. I have 3 kinds, to the zinnias, to the asters. They just went from place to place to place. So by having these bouquet on the porch, it was amazing to see the butterflies coming to the vase of flowers. And it was fun because when I got back, Jess said to me, "Oh yeah, I put flowers out for the butterflies too. So if you don't have a big garden, you can pick wildflowers." One of the longest lasting flowers that I picked is this Eupatorium celestinum, which is the perennial ageratum, which has been going for about a month in my garden. This was still beautiful. Look, here comes a monarch. This was still beautiful when we left, and one of my friends took a bouquet home with this in it. The monarch wants to be in the video. And this really does attract them. At one point I had 2 monarchs on the Eupatorium celestinum fighting for the same flower. I'm like, guys, there's a whole vase full. There's enough to go around. So it was truly fun. And on my way home, oh, one more thing. There was another goldenrod that was in the woods that I adore. And this also lasted the full 6 days in a vase. And this is Solidago rugosa fireworks. Now, I'm not sure if it was fireworks, but the flowers look just like this. I just picked these from our very shady garden. And the flowers are thin and they come up and they hang down. And when my friend Caroline and I were on the picnic table making the arrangements, she goes, "We need more yellow." So we just wandered over, always have my pruning shears on my hip, and picked some of this Solidago. And we put it in, and that too lasted the full 6 days. And this plant is deer-proof, and it's growing in the shade. So it's a really cool plant. Now, you'd never know it if you looked at it like this. It's called rugosa. The leaves are rough, rugose. But once you put one plant in the garden, you'll have a plant 2 to 3 feet across within probably 3 years. So it's really neat to see that you can even make arrangements from the goldenrods and the asters that you find in the woods. So then we got in the car and drove home, which I would hate to say was fun because of all of the beautiful scenery that we took the back roads for about an hour. We got back on the highway and we passed something that I see every year. This is Helianthus salicifolius, the willow leaf sunflower, unpinched. And you can see this was pinched really low. Unpinched, this plant gets to 6 feet tall. All along Route 87, just north of Albany, for a couple of miles, there is a version of this plant growing wild in between the 2 north and south lanes. The version that's growing wild, I believe, is Helianthus maximiliana, which has a more of a thicker willow leaf. But every single year, when we're driving past it, I'm sticking my head out the window going, I have never seen this plant growing wild along the side of the road, except right here on Route 87. And the other thing you see along the side of the road is panicum grass and eragrostis, sand love grass, which has a pink plumy flower, and that's mowed. So you see a sea of pink, and then you see the taller panicum with the perennial sunflowers and the milkweed. So when you travel, if you're like me, you want to explore the land around you. It's only when you do that that you can really see what plants look like in their native habitat. And I've been saying to my friends for years that one of the most beautiful things about this part of the Adirondacks, we were up near Scroon Lake and Paradox Lake and Fort Ticonderoga, was that there were no invasives. There have never been any invasives up there. When we did our 2 to 3 mile walk, just as we were getting into our cars, we looked to the right and we found 5 little patches of barberry with red berries on it. And we were horrified. It was the first time I'd seen this. And I assumed that somebody landscaped with it and it got loose. So we were just pulling it out with our bare hands, no gloves, but we really needed somebody to get in there with a shovel. And that made me sad because I hadn't seen any bittersweet, I hadn't seen any Japanese knotweed, and this was the very first thing I ever saw walking in the woods in the northern Adirondacks. So keep an eye out when you're traveling, come back and report what you see and try and duplicate some of those landscapes back in your home garden. So we're gonna see how the sound worked on this, and if it worked, we're going to save it and we're going to put it up at 4 o'clock. If you have any questions about the plants I'm talking about or what I saw or anything that you know of that's growing in the Adirondacks that you'd like to contribute to the conversation, go on to Facebook and post. So this is Nancy from NatureWorks saying we're having a great time right now. We've got monarchs being released here, and we're going to be at the Durham Fair all weekend starting tonight. It's a 4-day fair. We did a garden at the fair, and we also are in the Discovery Center where we are showing everybody how we tag and release the monarchs. And I'm giving a talk on Saturday at 11 on Have a Happy Habitat. So there's a lot going on. We'll be releasing and tagging monarchs here as well. We've been getting truckload after truckload of fresh plants, and we have so many asters, so many perennial mums, so many fall bloomers that you just won't believe it. So this is Nancy from NatureWorks saying, get on in here and I'll see you at the fair. Bye-bye.